This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by Manscaped. Get 20% off plus free shipping and 2 free gifts when you purchase the new Perfect Package 3.0 kit with promo code Gators. Head over to manscaped.com and purchase yours today.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me for this episode is co-host Will Miles. You can find him at readandreaction.com and on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Well, man, a lot going on in the world today. Hope everything's safe up there in Philadelphia. I know it's a little crazier up there than a lot of other places around the United States and the world, but I hope all is safe and you're doing good up there.
Yeah, we're doing fine. It's been a weird couple of weeks, but obviously I think things are starting to settle down a little bit. Certainly excited that it sounds like we're going to get some football this fall, and everybody's starting to announce the players are coming back and all that sort of stuff. I know back in March, you and I were hesitant to believe that we were actually going to have this, and it sounds like there might even be some fans in the stands. So mark it down, guys. We need to figure out when we're going down there and when we're gonna hang out and enjoy the fall, because it's been an interesting spring and start to the summer.
Absolutely. We're getting closer to some normalcy, Will. So we will talk about it in this episode as I guess not so normal in a way, because players are on campus working out here in June when they're kind of really trying to get in tune with summer classes and stuff before the summer or before the season kicks off. But now with coronavirus and COVID, everything that went on there, players are now finding their way back to campus. So we'll get into that a bit on this episode. Most players are back on campus. So we'll get into that. One player who's not going to be on campus and one Johnnie Brown. I'll take a look back at Reche Caldwell, what he meant for Gator Nation after his passing away this past weekend. And then Will and I would do something really fun. We kind of planned this for a while. As Will said, we probably shouldn't plan much because it takes forever to get to it, because as the moniker goes, Will, for the podcast, is there's never a dull moment. So we've always had plenty to talk about. So we've had this episode planned for at least a month. And with everything going on, we wanted to do something fun. It just took us a while to get to it.
It was funny. I went back into our messages to find some of the categories we talked about. And it was just like, continue scrolling. So, yeah, we've been planning this one for a while, but for the most part, it's been pretty good news in Florida recently until obviously the news about Brown this week. So, it's been a good thing to talk about good things for a change and not necessarily just be talking about negative. So I was happy to push this one off, and this is going to be fun too, because this is just sort of nostalgia and talking about what we prefer and those sorts of things. So it'll be fun too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get into it. But before we do, remember you can find Gators Breakdown at news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. There you'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes, as well as News4Jax coverage of the Gators. Please share, rate, and review Gators Breakdown. Subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, and follow Gators Breakdown on social media, on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. So, Will, man, here we go. Players are back, or most of the players are, along with most of the true freshmen are back on campus for voluntary workouts. They do not have to be there right now. There are a few, quote, voluntary. It kind of is, though. I was talking with somebody yesterday. There are a few players who have decided to hold back. Their parents have decided to hold back to kind of maybe see what's going on there with the worry of COVID and make sure there's not going to be any spread. Florida got some good news there, because today they did announce there's 87 football players that have been tested, and staff as well. This includes staff, and nobody has tested positive, and they're still waiting on 7 of the tests. So 80 have come back negative. Good sign there. But most of the team has shown up for these voluntary workouts. 17 signees showed up over the weekend, with Xavier Henderson and Jahiri Rogers showing up on Tuesday. Mordecai McDaniel, Finley Graham are expected to arrive later in June. Well, we have no idea how these players have taken care of themselves over these last few months. Some will show up in shape, some will not. Some guys have continued to work out, and some guys thought this might be time to relax a little bit. That's going to be the case for every team out there, it's going to happen. Every team's going through that. But Nick Savage is going to ease them into it. Everyone figures everything out, and taking the right precautions. Florida announced, as I said, nobody has tested positive for COVID so far. So football players, they've been tested. They're all good to go. Initial workouts have begun. Will, I feel sorry for these kids coming up later this week. when everything, Nick Savage is okay. We've warmed up these first couple of days. We're going to ease into it, but maybe even starting here on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. These players coming back, especially the guys who haven't been taking care of themselves the last few weeks, last couple of months. I think they're coming in for a rude awakening.
Yeah, you would think so. I think Savage is going to test them and see who did what he told them to do when they went home and see who didn't. And I think that'll play a large role in, especially for the younger guys, who gets an opportunity to show during fall practice. Because here's the reality. It sounds like they're going to have 6 weeks to prepare when it comes to fall practice. And so you're going to have limited reps. And some guy, a guy who is a freshman or a sophomore who comes in and isn't in shape isn't going to get the same look as a guy who comes in and is in fantastic shape. And that's just the reality. So I'm sure they've made it clear to their players over the last 2 or 3 months that they have certain expectations, and that they probably got weight goals for everybody, and lifting goals for everybody, and running goals for everybody. And they're going to make sure that they can hit them. So I wouldn't want to be one of those guys this week. That's for sure.
Well, not everything is good news here. One player that didn't show up and has to go the JUCO route is defensive lineman signee Johnnie Brown. Brown's grades were not sufficient to get into Florida at this time, so he's going to head the JUCO route to continue his playing career. He's been committed and signed to Florida for about a year and a half. Was a signee along with defensive linemen with the likes of Gervon Dexter, Lamar Goods, Jalen Lee, Princely Uman-Milun. Thought to be, along the defensive tackles there with Dexter, Good, and Lee. So right there, not necessarily damaging since the 3 others were signed, but Brown was, a 4-star rated on the 24/7 Sports Composite, top 300 player, rated 226th best player in the country on the 24/7 Sports Composite. So it hurts there. You do lose a pretty good player here. Also hurts, Will, because this is just another player who signed for Florida and won't suit up for the Gators. Now, he won't take a counter up since he never enrolled for the Gators, and hopefully he can get back in the fold like JUCOs, DeJuan Black and De'Ave Hammond are working to do right now. But, pair this with Isaiah Walker, who has recently transferred out, and you have 2 players from the 2020 class who won't suit up for the Gators coming up. So now that would also be kind of looked at as normal attrition out of a freshman class, maybe not right away like these 2 guys, but 1 or 2 guys that won't play. But on the heels of what has happened in players from the previous 2 classes, the attrition and the attrition that's come from those, it does signal some kind of alarm here. So now, look, I'll be the first to admit, not all these are on Dan Mullen and the staff. There was some accountability from the player involved and ones that were in trouble off the field or couldn't make the grades. Some have played, some have never have played a down for Florida. Some are medical hardships. There's a rough part of it there, but just willing it off. And Bill Sykes, he and I have talked a bit the last couple of days in dealing with this. And Justin Watkins, Lucas Kroll, Malik Langham, Chris Bleish, John Huggins, Randy Russell, Noah Banks, Chris Steele, DeJuan Black, R.J. Henderson, Jalen Jones, De'Ave Hammond, Wardrick Wilson, Johnnie Brown, Isaiah Walker. Still waiting word on Leonard Manuel. We'll see what happens there for the Gators. But, Will, that's a lot of players. That's already 15, not counting Leonard Manuel there. He hasn't signed yet, can be included in this conversation because if he has the grades, he'll be a Gator. And if not, more than likely Ole Miss or the JUCO route for him as well. And, in talking with Bill, he brought up a good point. That right now for Dan Mullen and staff equals out to about 17 and a half recruits per class when you're looking at about, wanting to sign around 25 per class. So, of course, we've hit on it plenty of times. Mullen's been able to make up for it a lot in the transfer portal, and for the foreseeable future, he'll have to just to make up for this. He's going to have to continue to chase that route right now. I know other programs have attrition, but when you're trying to dig out of the subpar recruiting from Jim McElwain era and improve the talent base at the same time, getting bodies is an issue. So it may be an issue Mullen can fix, and hopefully we're done with that issue in this class. But I'm just not sure how viable it is to continue to chase in the portal. I like to use the portal to get key players to make a difference in key spots, and hopefully that continues as well. Just not to have to rely on it so much because of the attrition that's just added up in these last 3 recruiting cycles.
Yeah, I mean, you look at recruiting and you don't want to look at one recruit and say, hey, this guy's the most important recruit. You win some, you lose some, those sorts of battles you look at and you say, okay, sometimes we're going to win them, sometimes we're not. And you can deal with it if one guy doesn't come to campus, or if you win one battle, you don't necessarily claim victory. The issue is we want to see, we want to see consistency. And if he's going to have the 9th rated class, let's get the full 9th rated class in on campus. And that's been a problem over the last 2 or 3 years, and really been a problem ever since he came to Gainesville. And you could talk about guys who haven't made grades. You can talk about guys who've had discipline problems. You can talk about guys who've had injury. But the reality is that most other programs are not having the same level of difficulty getting guys to get to their first fall camp. And that's happened a lot the last 2 seasons for Florida, and that's a problem. And what's going to end up happening eventually is that there's going to be a year, and it may not be this year, it may not be next year, but there's going to be a year where Florida has the injury bug hit. And when the injury bug hits, they're going to have to, every single guy that they've recruited is going to have to turn out to be a good player. Otherwise, they're going to struggle. And you saw that a little bit in both the McElwain and Muschamp years, where maybe the recruiting, especially for Muschamp, wasn't quite as bad from a national perspective, but there were certain position areas where he really didn't have the depth. And when they had injuries, quarterback is one that I can think of specifically with Muschamp, where when you had an injury, well, all of a sudden you didn't have the guy behind him who could win games in the SEC. So that's something that could crop up. I think when you look at the overall talent level at Florida, it's increased from where it was with McElwain. I think it's probably pretty close to on par with where it was with Muschamp. It's down below where it was with Meyer, and I think it's down below where it was with Spurrier as well. And the reality is that those teams with Spurrier and Meyer were the class of the SEC. The teams with Muschamp and McElwain weren't. This is sort of in between, and we'll see whether Mullen's coaching abilities can overcome that, whether he can develop these guys in a way that's better than has been done in the past. But the reality is you recruit for top end ability, but you also recruit for depth. And the guys who have left the program early over the last 2 or 3 years are really going to harm the depth eventually if Florida starts to have injuries. And you mentioned defensive tackle is a place where Florida was pretty strong in that class. Same thing with Isaiah Wynn leaving. Walker, sorry, Isaiah Walker. Isaiah Wynn's the Georgia Bulldog.
Yeah, that was the only reason I wanted to correct it.
Same thing with Isaiah Walker leaving, right? You look at it and say, hey, the offensive line is pretty strong. You bring in Reese as a transfer and those sorts of things. But again, it only takes 1 or 2 injuries, and all of a sudden you got a true freshman out there. And that's sort of what they're looking at, is there just isn't, a senior goes down, there's not a junior waiting in the wings. It's a senior goes down, you're going to be a freshman or a sophomore with limited practice time, and with the coronavirus, very limited practice time. And so that's just something Florida's going to have to overcome. It's not, it's nothing I'm going to scream about. It's just, it is, right? Like it is the case that Florida's depth is going to be worse than some of those teams who've been pulling in 25, 26 guys a year, even if those programs have had attrition. They've had 25-man classes with 2 or 3 or 4 guys who have had attrition out. Florida's had 20-man classes with 2 or 3 guys leaving, and that'll make a difference eventually.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not trying to sound an alarm here or anything. I don't make more of it than it really is. It definitely has to be discussed and talked about, because especially the last class, in the 2019 class, that was unprecedented to have that many guys who never played a snap for you. Yes, some went through spring or whatever. You had them for just a little while, and some even played in the spring game. But I mean, to have, and some of them, and the one part of this too, Will, is those names I rattled off. Some of those were the top end of your class. Some of those guys were the best recruits of the class. in like Chris Steele, R.J. Henderson, and Jalen Jones with 4-star quarterback. Now you're seeing now where Florida's going to go chase not necessarily chase, but have to go get a second quarterback in this class, but to make up for that loss of Jalen Jones here. You've had like I said, and Johnnie Brown was a 4-star in his own right, 3-star on Rivals as well, but in the composite of 24/7 Sports composite, a 4-star there. So I don't want to try and make too much of it. It's just I definitely want fans to be in the know of if you, in your case, Will, you start seeing younger guys out there that maybe are not ready or out there before they're ready. Well, this is what you can go back and look at as the case of why those guys are out there.
Sure. I think Johnnie Brown not coming to Gainesville isn't the be all end all, right? We don't look at that and say, exactly, oh my God, the sky is falling. Yeah. I think what you do though is you look at overall trends and you say that overall, this is something where Florida is going to have to improve. And whether that means identifying guys who are going to be able to get in, whether that means better background checks on guys who've had disciplinary issues, whether it means just having a better fit between the coach and the staff. And this is one of those things where when you're a number 1 class in the country and you lose a guy or two, you go, all right, well, it's fine. We still have plenty of depth. When you're a number 9 team in the country and you lose a couple of guys, it's like, all right, that depth becomes important. And that's maybe where there are tipping points where you sort of see the Alabamas and the Clemsons of the world are significantly ahead from a recruiting perspective, and Ohio States are significantly ahead of that next tier. And Florida was sort of on the tail end of that next tier. But with some of the attrition they've had, you probably put them on the 3rd tier. And in the SEC, you're going to play a lot of teams that are in that 1st tier. LSU's probably just nipping at the heels of getting in that 1st tier, and Georgia's up there too. So, it's tough to win without the best players. And Florida has brought in a lot of excellent players. But at the end of the day, yes, depth in the SEC makes a big difference. Johnnie Brown's a good player. He was going to make a difference, and now he's not. And that's the reality. So Florida's going to have somebody else step up. Again, I don't think we want to make if this was a one-time incident, we wouldn't be making a big deal of it. But right. It seems like we're talking about this 3 times every offseason, which is why it becomes disappointing, because you just want to have an offseason where you don't talk about it, where all 25 guys come, make it to campus, and 2 years later, you're looking back and all 25 of them are contributing on the field.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll, of course, have to get into some sad news here in Gator Nation from this past weekend, and the passing of Reche Caldwell, shot and killed outside of his home Saturday night, and later died on the way to the hospital at age 41. And Will, you had a nice piece over at readingreaction.com looking back at Caldwell and his time as a Gator and what it meant to you. And this one hurt Gator Nation a bit. There were tweets and messages from the likes of Steve Spurrier, who coached Reche, and also a message from Rex Grossman, one of Caldwell's quarterbacks during his time at Florida. A quote from Rex Grossman here on Twitter: "Rest in peace, Reche. You were one of my favorite teammates of all time. I will always remember our time at Florida for your unreal talent, infectious humor, and our shared success as a team. You will be missed by all your Gator family," in the quote. Caldwell caught 27 passes as a freshman, Will, in 1999, added 49 as a sophomore, including 6 catches for a team-high 110 yards and a loss to Miami in the Sugar Bowl. By that time, his junior season come around, Caldwell teamed with quarterback Rex Grossman and fellow receivers Jabbar Gaffney and Taylor Jacobs to rewrite the school record books, just coming from Scott Carter over at FloridaGators.com. The Gators led the nation in 2001, Steve Spurrier's final season, with 405.2 yards passing per game. The UF record still stands and is 45 yards more than the second-place team, the 1995 Gators. In his final season, Caldwell caught 65 passes for 1,059 yards, the yardage total 8th on Florida's single-season list. Finished his career ranked 8th in career receptions with 141, and his 2,088 career yards ranked 11th in school history. He once caught a touchdown pass in 10 consecutive games, Will, a mark topped in UF record book only by an 11-game streak by Riedel Anthony in 1996. Caldwell declared for the NFL draft after his redshirt junior season. San Diego Chargers second-round pick in the 2002 draft, spending 6 seasons in the NFL with the Chargers, Patriots, and Redskins. And Will, the connection, with the Caldwell family also became stronger because his little brother as well, Andre, signed with Florida in 2003 and carried on that family tradition there. So, both, the younger Caldwell surpassed some of his older brother's records and is the second and is the school's all-time leading receiver with 185 career catches. So Will, the Caldwell family means so much to Gator Nation, and with everything going on in the world right now, this just added to it all on Sunday morning. Reche holds a special place being a part of Steve Spurrier's final season, being a part of a trio that also consisted of Jabbar Gaffney and Taylor Jacobs, and reminding people of that mid-'90s trio with the fun and gun with Steve Spurrier. He was such a great all-around wide receiver and athlete, was a baseball star too. So people who interacted with him stressed how great of a person he was as well.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that sort of came across when you were reading the tributes of his teammates and coaches and anybody who'd interacted with him, was that he was a guy who was quick with a smile. He was a guy who was quick with a story, and he was always somebody that everybody enjoyed hanging out with. And he left a mark on him. And, I think it says a lot that people like Tom Brady posted stuff on Twitter. Brady, some of Caldwell's worst moments actually came with Brady at the helm at quarterback, just because, and really replaced by Randy Moss after that 2006 season. But Brady still reached out, and a bunch of his teammates in the NFL and in college reached out to him. In particular, Rex Grossman. You already read that one. I mean, he was a big part of the 2000 SEC championship team. He was a big part of the 2001 team that sort of navigated through the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And we're going to talk a little bit later when we talk about that Tennessee game at the end of the year. But beyond that, I think Caldwell, Gaffney, and Jacobs were that next incarnation of great Gator wide receivers. I know Spurrier talked a little bit this weekend on Twitter about Caldwell, but also, about those guys being as good or better than Hilliard and Anthony. And that really was the feeling. The feeling was that team was unstoppable. And, I was a kid from Indiana who moved down to Florida in 1997, 99, I go to UF, and all of a sudden the fun and gun is alive with those guys in there. And, Caldwell might have been a little bit overshadowed by Gaffney, because Gaffney always had a little bit better statistics. But you go back and you look at those games, and man, just the combination of those two, you couldn't double one guy or the other, because you were going to get burned the minute you decided to. And I wrote in my article a little bit that we should have. Part of the reason that Florida struggled when Ron Zook took over, obviously, is because of Ron Zook. But part of the reason that they struggled is because they lost pretty much their entire wide receiving core, except for Taylor Jacobs, coming into that 2002 season. And I think that says something about Gaffney. It says something about Caldwell and their ability. So, somebody that I watched while I was there, somebody who's pretty close to my age, right? He's 3 years older than I am. He's got a 13-year-old son. That sort of thing just sort of takes your breath away when you hear somebody die at 41 of what sounds like a planned attack to come and rob him and potentially take his life. And your heart just goes out to the Caldwell family, and certainly, like you said, with the connection to Florida, it's one of our own who's hurting right now, and just really want to send our thoughts out to him and his family.
Absolutely. So thoughts and prayers go out to the Caldwell family, and I think the funeral is coming up soon as well. The details, I didn't get the details before we came on air here, but I did see that they were released, so everybody can go out there.
Yeah, his mother was setting up a fund for his son's college education. So that's okay. If Gator fans want to help out, if I get information, I'll pass it along so everybody can see it. I'm sure you will too.
Absolutely. So get back to some good news a bit here, Will, as we move on here on this episode of Gators Breakdown, and a return to football somewhat, as the players are made their way on campus, of course, this week as well. And also this week, the NCAA Oversight Committee has prepared a four-phase plan for the season that includes a 6-week period of mandatory workouts that include walkthroughs in July and preseason camp beginning in early August. Sports Illustrated was the first one with this report here, and this would be a return to football in the form of helping the time that was lost in the spring, Will, due to coronavirus, of course. The plan will need final approval from the Division I Council. It is expected to get approved here, which is tentatively scheduled for a meeting June 17th. So the details here: teams with season starting Labor Day weekend, like Florida, can begin working with their players in person as early as July 13th, at least 25 days before the first permissible preseason practice date. Teams participating in Week 0 games will be able to move the proposed dates up 1 week in the calendar due to the games set for late August. Those schools can begin mandatory workouts as early as July 6th. So here we go, Will. Players and coaches will be allowed to use a football in drills starting as early as July 24th. July 17th for week 0 team. So Florida, July 24th is when they'll still start being able to use a football in drills as they run through walkthroughs and meetings totaling 20 hours per week. That number is pretty important, Will, because spring practice is 20 hours per week as well over a 34-day window. So when using the football, this is about 2 weeks shorter than that compared to a normal spring with what they're given or what they're proposing this summer. Preseason practices can begin as soon as August 7th or 29 days before the team's first game. That was pretty much normal. Going to be if everything was fine, that was when fall camp was going to be starting pretty much anyway. So Will, man, they're moving ahead to get things back to normal here, and this looks to be besides that little starting in July on July 24th when they're being able to use football and drills pretty close to normal and a little something to make up for spring.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to look, they don't have the ability to do that. You can't put a guy through a 10-week spring camp or through a 10-week fall camp and then make him play a full season. I just don't think that's fair, and they're not going to do that. Hopefully, they can use the time that they've got with Savage over the next 2 or 3 weeks or next month or so to really get these guys prepared, because that's my biggest concern is that we're going to see a lot of injuries because guys weren't able to work out, guys weren't able to stay in prime condition, and then you bring them back and all of a sudden you start seeing some injuries once you start doing the football activities. And I'm talking like hamstrings and things like that are going to pop up and maybe haunt people throughout the season. So you sort of hope you don't see that. You hope people are ready when it's time to go. The big thing I think, and I didn't really even think about it until you mentioned the week 0 and the week 1 this year, is last year may actually end up being more important for Florida than I had originally maybe thought. So last year, Florida had that early game with Miami and then had the extra bye week throughout the year. And you do wonder whether some of those guys who were early enrollees, guys who were freshmen, who redshirted, maybe even some of the sophomores who were backups, maybe got some time last year in the fall that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise just because of that second bye week. And, that may pay off this year because Florida's a pretty experienced team. A lot of these guys coming back, I suspect there's going to be a large learning curve for the freshmen, but I also suspect that at the end of the day, if those guys aren't really going to be difference makers, they're probably just going to redshirt because of the way things are going this year. And some of that extra time guys got last fall may end up being a big deal because they're going to be further along in the playbook. This is one of the areas where, the continuity at Florida over the last 3 years becomes really important, particularly when you look at some of the opponents. I mean, right, when you look at Georgia and all of the changes there, when you look at LSU, all the guys going to the NFL, but Brady going to the Panthers. There's not a lot of continuity in the SEC right now, except for at Alabama, and they're trying to deal with Tua leaving. So, it's a prime opportunity for Florida to take advantage of the experience that they have and sort of hit the ground running at that 6-week mark and make sure that everybody is ready to go. And then obviously Florida has a pretty lax schedule early on too, so there will be some opportunities to maybe extend camp a little bit. I don't think Florida's maybe necessarily really gearing up for Eastern Washington this year the same way they were for Miami.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, and I was looking. We'll get into it. Preseason magazines are out, and I just quickly was trying to catch a glance. There's an FCS section there, and Eastern Washington, I think, was ranked 20th in the FCS there. So yeah, that's in the should be another cupcake. Prepare for Kentucky kind of week there, because the problem that team has gave Florida over the last 2 years, Florida needs all the prep they can get for Kentucky.
Well, that makes a difference, right? I mean, isn't USC starting off the year playing against Alabama? And, if Florida had that game coming up this year, we'd be like, all right, you got 6 weeks to prepare. This is pretty intense. But really, you've got 7 weeks to prepare if you figure that Eastern Washington game is going to be a cupcake. Kentucky, I think Kentucky's a team you got to look out for. But, I mean, let's be honest. Florida's aspirations this year are to make it to the playoff. They need to be able to dispatch of a team like Kentucky, even if they don't play their best. And then you're not really playing anybody of even remotely equivalent talent until you come up against LSU. Maybe you could say that the Tennessee game on the road is a little bit of a challenge, but again, Tennessee hasn't shown anything over the last 2 years to make us think against a quality team that they're going to be able to hold up. So, Florida probably has a little bit of time to get ready beyond just that camp. That is one of the things that both the experience for the Gators, but then also that schedule, I think does does point towards them having an advantage coming out of this pandemic in a way that maybe some other teams don't.
Yep. All right, Will, ball talk. Support for today's episode comes from Manscaped. Manscaped has the right tools to get the job done quickly, safely, and hygienically. Father's Day is just around the corner, and you probably need a gift for a hairy dad. Get him and yourself the Manscaped Perfect Package. Manscaped is the only men's brand dedicated to below-the-waist grooming and hygiene. Manscaped is forever changing the grooming game with their Perfect Package 3.0 Essentials Kit. The Perfect Package 3.0 kit comes with the new and improved Lawnmower 3.0 waterproof cordless body trimmer and a ton of other liquid formulations to round out your manscaping routine. This third-generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to prevent manscaping accidents, nick-free shaving thanks to Manscaped's advanced skin-safe technology. And of course, let's not forget about the Crop Preserver, an anti-chafing ball deodorant and moisturizer. You already put deodorant on your armpits, right? So why are you not putting deodorant on the smelliest part of your body? When you purchase the new Perfect Package 3.0 kit at manscaped.com, you get the biggest bang for your buck. Subscribers get a new replacement blade refill for your lawnmower trimmer delivered to your door every 3 months, making sure your trimmer always stays fresh and clean. For a limited time, subscribers get not one, but 2 free gifts. The Shed Travel Bag, a $39 value, and the patented high-performance anti-chafing Manscaped Boxer Briefs. This is an awesome Father's Day gift. Get 20% off plus free shipping with code Gators at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with code Gators at manscaped.com. Will, you got yours.
I did. You had one sent my way. It's awesome, man. I gotta say, people should go out there and pick one up. It's certainly worth the money and worth the double entendre when your friends come over. Anyway,
man, they're commercials. Have you seen them on like ESPN and stuff?
Hey, they're creative. That's I can give it to them for that. So
they are.
We appreciate the sponsorship and I appreciate my care package.
Yeah, working for News4Jax and stuff, I kind of have to play it on the safe side of I can't go crazy like with their commercials sometimes, but chopping up a hot dog and stuff like that. But
I'm glad you're taking the high road, Dave.
Yeah, I try to take the high road a little bit, but you can just picture all that stuff. or not.
Yeah, probably our listeners would prefer we not.
Yeah. All right. Well, something like I said, something we have planned for a little while. We're calling it This or That. Everybody, if you follow me on Twitter, I've been kind of sharing the message the last week or so, and just a good little fun conversation here of some choices, preferences that we can have some fun with. So the first one, we'll start with This or That, and it's Urban Meyer or Steve Spurrier. And I think there's so many ways to look at this one. And basically, who would you prefer? Who do you like better? However you want to define it, you can define it. But Will, this one, man, this one's tough for a person my age. I just turned 37 last week. I'm right in the middle of that, growing up with Steve Spurrier, but then watching Urban Meyer come in my early college years and experiencing all the winning that he did and bringing 2 national championships. And so I remember more of what Urban Meyer did because I was growing up with Steve Spurrier, and I was still 10, 11, 12, just getting into football, learning what football was about, it being fun, but also having a whole lot of other things in my memory, go play video games or go chase girls or whatever, whatever the deal was. That's just, what it was. You're learning to drive and, not really wanting to stay home on a Saturday, watch Florida, but then go out. Didn't care for college football as much as I do now, so just being a kid during those Steve Spurrier years and then becoming a diehard Gator fan, the tail end of Spurrier and following Zook and Meyer and Muschamp all the way up to now. This one's tough. I'll probably, I know I'll tick a lot of people off of this. I'll say Urban Meyer. I was able to enjoy that more just because of my age. I was able to go more to more of the games. The job that I work at, I was able to be on the sideline a lot, be close to the players, interview the players a lot. So I was much closer to those Meyer year teams and winning 2 national championships. And we'll get into it, which our favorite national championship year is. But going to Glendale and telling you didn't have a chance to go beat Ohio State, and you go beat Ohio State, and then a couple of years later, there's no way you can stop that Oklahoma offense, and you win that, and you win that championship as well. So with this one, now I'll go Urban Meyer, but of course, Steve Spurrier still holds a closed deer. I mean, he's Gator through and through. If you want to talk about totality, you've got to go Spurrier as you count him playing and winning the Heisman Trophy and coming back and coaching and doing all the winning and setting the standard for what we know the Gators to be. But for me, being able to enjoy much more of it, I'll go with Urban Meyer.
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned earlier, I didn't really become a big Florida fan until 98, 99, once I decided I was going to come to Florida because I grew up in Indiana. I was an Indiana basketball fan, moved down to Florida back in 97. So, for 7 of those years, I knew of Spurrier. I knew what he was doing in college football, but it wasn't necessarily my team. And so that does impact things a little bit. The interesting thing is, you think of Meyer as sort of being just a real flash, right? I mean, it's 6 years in Florida, but the 2 national championships, and you're like, oh, that team never lost. But it turns out his winning percentage is almost identical to Spurrier. In fact, Spurrier is a little bit higher, just barely. They're both basically at 81% when you look at their winning percentage. The thing I think that maybe differentiates the two is that Meyer, it doesn't feel like ever lost a game that involved bragging rights for us as fans. And I'm sure he did, and I'm sure there are times,
2007 Georgia.
Yeah, well, but he definitely made up for it in 2008, right? Which was also part of it. I mean, we enjoyed. I mean, that was the thing about Spurrier, right? Is that he had the ability to insult people without coming off as a complete a-hole, as opposed to Meyer, who absolutely came off as a complete a-hole while he was insulting people. And part of that was great. Like you love it when you're sticking it to people, but then obviously when you go through some tough times there towards the end, then everybody takes glee in it. But that to me is the big thing, is that Florida never lost to Tennessee under Meyer. Florida never lost to Florida State under Meyer, lost to Georgia once. LSU was always a really good game, lost to them in 2007 as well. But again, 2008, 2006, we're able to win those games. I think you were on the sideline for the jump pass in 2006. I was in the stands. Mm-hmm. Those sorts of things. There are memories that stand out from there that are just more vivid for me. And I think a lot of it has to do with age. But, the other thing is that I graduated in 2004. So Meyer comes in 2005, and my dad moved up to Gainesville. And so we started going to games together once a year or twice a year then at that point. And so there's a sentimental aspect of the Urban Meyer years where, Dad and I are going to the games, and then my brother started coming. And, now we've usually got a niece or a nephew who comes with us too. So it's like a group of 4 or 5 of us who go to the games. It's a yearly tradition. And it's sort of the grounding that I have in Gainesville, even though I've moved away and I'm not there, I'm not able to get there for every game, but being able to go with family, it sort of makes a bigger difference now, right? Like we plan vacations and trips around getting down there for football games. And I took my daughter a few years ago, and my son's still not quite old enough to do it yet based on his level of maturity, but I'm going to eventually take those guys when they get old enough. So it turned into more of a family thing under the Meyer regime. And so it really, if you ask me, do I prefer Muschamp or McElwain to Spurrier, I'd probably say those two, just because there's the familial aspect to it. Though obviously the winning was much, much more significant under Spurrier. And really, he sort of woke the sleeping giant, right? I mean, he established Florida as a national power, not only in 1996 winning the title, but 1995 going undefeated. Mm-hmm. And then obviously the poor loss, or the terrible loss in the Fiesta Bowl, but still getting there, I think, was a big deal for Florida. And you look back at where they were under Spurrier, just from like a national ranking standpoint. I mean, they're 13th in 1990, 7th in 91, 10th in 92, 5th in 93, 7th in 94, 2nd in 95, 1st in 96, 4th in 97, and 5th in 98, and then 3rd in 2001. I mean, basically, they were a top 12 team from 1990 until 2001 when he left. And that's something that you can't say about Urban Meyer's teams, right? I mean, Urban Meyer has a couple of number ones, but he's also got a couple of unranked or ranked 25th at the end of the year. And and Spurrier never had that. So sort of the highs with Meyer were higher, the lows were lower. But you look back at those rivalry games, and that's one of the things that I think all the fans are starting to get a little bit anxious about with Mullen, is he needs to win that rivalry game against Georgia, because his predecessor and everybody that he's going to be compared against won those games against Georgia. So I'd say Meyer too, but again, that has more to do with the familial aspect than it does what he did for the program.
Yeah, if it wasn't for me being a bit closer to the program than my age, if it was just, I think, a blanket, just look back, everything kind of on a clean slate. If I wasn't so involved with those Meyer teams, I probably would go Spurrier, just because of, there's probably no Urban Meyer without a Steve Spurrier. And he's, like you said, he set the baseline. He put Florida on the map. Florida had some good seasons before that. He put Florida on the map as a Heisman Trophy winner in the 60s. And then brought it back again in the 90s as a coach. It's just, I can't take my part of it away. That's why, kind of like you, that's just why I end up going with Meyer.
I would say I appreciate what Spurrier did more than I appreciate what Meyer did.
There you go.
But there's just a closeness to the Meyer era that someone my age looks at, and the memories are fresh, right? I mean, the
there's a recency bias to it.
Yeah, the hit by Major Wright against Oklahoma, the interception by Ahmad Black against Oklahoma, the light bulbs flashing when Tim Tebow was out there for his last game against Florida State, the game in the mud against Florida State, the timeouts against Georgia, all those sorts of things, the jump pass against LSU, and then the fake run that we'd never seen before when he hit Lewis Murphy wide open, streaking down the field. Like, those are things that I'm sure people who went to school at Florida back in 95, 96, 97 remember about Spurrier's teams. That's just what we remember because of where we were from an age perspective.
All right, next one's fun too. Preference: Will Muschamp, Jim McElwain. So this one, there's two ways to look at it here. Okay, Muschamp grew up in Gainesville, went to Georgia, came back, killed the opening press conference of the reason he grew up in Gainesville. I walked to the stadium, went to games, and Muschamp, for all intents and purposes, he was a good guy. You could have you feel like you could have a conversation with Will Muschamp. Jim McElwain had the benefit of winning the SEC East twice in a down SEC. You could give him credit for that. He did take the Gators to Atlanta, but after get their brains beat in by FSU the week before, and then ended up getting their brains beat in by Alabama the week after that as well. But did take teams to Atlanta, so there was more of a winning aspect to Jim McElwain. Made Florida football fun again a bit. In 2015, you had the big win over Tennessee in the swamp with Reche Caldwell, of course, and then the big win versus Ole Miss when they come into town. Then it kind of crashing down once Will Greer out there, and then it just kind of from that point on, it just got really weird with McElwain. I know the Hurricane game the next year with LSU and making the goal line stand, it's still one of the best moments in Gator football history, just with the way fans felt at that moment, but only later to go on and, like I said, get beat in the SEC championship game again. But a lot of those were because of Will Muschamp's players and the recruits and the players Will Muschamp signed there. So I think, with the friendly aspect of it, and I think looking back on it, you didn't necessarily hate Will Muschamp because of the kind of person he was. It's just he didn't get the job done. He couldn't win games. He lost inexplicable games, ended up just getting canned mainly because of that. When he's on the hot seat, goes and ends up beating Georgia, and then a week later gets his brains beat in by Missouri in his last season, and then the inexplicable South Carolina loss as well toward the end of his career. So I think choosing between these two, I'm going to choose Will Muschamp just because I like him better. Jim McElwain did win more, but came off brash, came off harsh to the media, just never really embraced much of being a Gator head coach, it seemed. Didn't embrace the fan base, the media at the same time, and then the whole death threats thing. That we all remember. We had episodes about that back in the time. We always wanted progress in year 3, and you had the credit card 9 and getting your brains beat in by Michigan to start the season. It just ended so much uglier under Jim McElwain than it did under Will Muschamp, even though McElwain had much more success in his first 2 seasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I guess the first season for Muschamp, I sort of say, all right, he took over Urban Meyer's program, and by Meyer's own admission, the program was broken. And then he goes 11-2 the next year, and the loss to Louisville really colors that one,
Yeah.
because you forget how good that team was and how close they were to playing for the national championship. And then obviously the next year, I mentioned earlier in the episode, the depth at the quarterback position. You got Skylar Morenweg playing for an injured. Jeff Driscoll goes out, and then Tyler Murphy goes out, and all of a sudden you got Morenweg in at quarterback, and it's not really fair, though. Obviously, the Georgia Southern game, I think, is the one that maybe sticks in people's craw for that one. And by then, it was basically over. They let him go for one more year, but that 7-5 season wasn't going to be enough. I'm not sure, quite honestly, that 10-2 would have been enough that year with the way people felt. But we didn't know what was coming next. So I'm going to tell you, I prefer the Muschamp era to the McElwain era. The only place that I prefer the McElwain era is I was writing by the time McElwain took over, and in 2016, I guess, is when I started writing. So I was writing through most of that era, which meant, I sort of got to see the highs, got to see the lows, got to really start to delve into what makes a coach good and what makes a coach not so good. And McElwain, quite honestly, from a on-field coaching perspective, did a pretty decent job those first 2 years. Pulled out some games that he probably shouldn't have. I mean, you mentioned the Greer to Callaway game, but the Felipe Franks deep throw, and he was unbelievable in one-score games for a really long time, until finally just sort of the pixie dust ran out there in year 3. McElwain was more entertaining. I mean, Muschamp would lose, just say, I'm going to fix it. Like, I'll get that fixed. It's like, all right, could you do that? All right. I mean, at least McElwain kept us on our toes a little bit and gave us reason to get rid of him. I'm pretty sure in year 4, Gator fans would have enjoyed having a reason to get rid of Muschamp like they did with McElwain. But I mean, obviously, I think I prefer Muschamp because the players were not getting in trouble. He made a point. I think it was Janoris Jenkins that he got rid of right away when he came in, made a point to make discipline a central tenet of what he was doing. And it really seems like he cared about his guys. So even after he moved on, when he came back and played Florida, those guys really, really, really embraced him and loved him as a head coach. I don't know that you could say the same thing about McElwain. And the fact that I felt like he didn't treat his players as well as Muschamp is really what tips the scales here. Is I thought McElwain was critical of his players and left them out there to answer questions that he should have really been the one out there answering, or he should have had Nussmeier out there answering, and he was leaving Franks and other guys out there to do that. So, it's not really close for me. Muschamp's the guy that I prefer as the head coach, but as a writer, McElwain certainly gave plenty of fodder.
And that 2012 season was so much fun too. With as you said, the Louisville game put a sour on it, but that 2012 season was a lot of fun. With going to Texas A&M and then going to Tennessee the very next week and getting 2 wins there, that was a lot of fun. Beating LSU at home as well was a season to remember. There, as we'll get into a little bit too with the disappointing loss to Georgia here. So we'll probably one of the more interesting ones here. Favorite national championship season or game, however you want to decide it, 96, 06, or 08. 96, of course, the first one. And then in 95, you're getting beat by Nebraska. You had an undefeated season, as you mentioned earlier. You get demolished by Tommy Frazier and Lawrence Phillips in Nebraska in 95, but able to bounce back the next year and get beat by FSU in the season finale. Some things happen there. You could beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. And the Big 12 championship game, I think, Texas lost there to open up the door. Texas beat Nebraska. I kind of forget about that now, of which way it went. And then Arizona State and Ohio State in the bowl game. And Florida finds themselves needing a victory over FSU in the Sugar Bowl. And, 52 points were put up, and the Gators are national champions over Florida State for the first national championship there in program history. And then fast forward 10 years, it's the 100 years of Gator football and second season under Urban Meyer. And Florida was a top 10 team going into 2006, but nobody was picking Florida to win the national championship in 2006, even after winning the SEC championship game and matching up versus Ohio State there. Michigan and Ohio State had just come off, probably the umpteenth game of the century that the media likes to point out once every year. But, 1 versus 2, and they should have a rematch. Florida doesn't deserve to be there. They can't score points. Everything's just defense, and they barely beat South Carolina with the cop block with Jarvis Moss, and big wins versus LSU at home that year, and all that good stuff. And I mean, it was. It wasn't pretty all of 2006, but the Gators kept finding a way to win. End up, beating Arkansas in the SEC championship game, and as I mentioned earlier, going to Glendale and being told for a month that they didn't have a chance to beat Ohio State. Troy Smith wins the Heisman Trophy, and Florida didn't have a chance against the Heisman Trophy winner and the Buckeyes, and come out and just beat the brakes off of Ohio State 41-14, a game that wasn't really even all that close after Ted Ginn takes the opening touchdown there. And then 2008, 2 years later, everything's going. Offense is humming along. Tim Tebow, Percy Harvin. You had the promise after the Ole Miss game, and after that, Florida finds their way. About the second half of that Arkansas game, the game after that Ole Miss game, and just goes on a tear, destroys everybody. A top 10 LSU team comes to the Swamp, and Florida destroys them, and really didn't look back. Sets up a 1 versus 2 matchup versus Alabama in the SEC championship game, and win that game without Percy Harvin. He's injured, and Percy Harvin comes back for the national championship. And look, there was no way. 24-14 was the final score. 24-14 was the final score versus that Oklahoma team that just seemed to be putting up 60 points week in and week out. There's no way that Florida defense can hang with that offense that snaps the ball every 12 seconds or so. Well, Florida held that team to 14 points. So this one a little tough in 96, 06, 08. Little recency, like with the Meyer Spurrier conversation, little recency bias with this one as well. It's tough. 96 the first, of course. You never forget your first. That one's special. 06, 08. I have a hard time choosing between those two. I think I go 2006. 2008 was special, and Dad and I went down to Miami, watched the national championship game together. But 2006, I think that whole season, it was as I mentioned earlier, the first season where I got close to the team. I was on the sideline for every home game, some of the away games too, and then being told for a straight month that you didn't have a chance to win, and you go out there and rout Ohio State. It was so much fun looking back at that game.
Yeah, I think 96 is so 08 is probably the one that's my least favorite, just because there were expectations and Florida fulfilled those expectations. I remember exactly where I was sitting when they lost to Ole Miss, and exactly what my feeling was when they missed the extra point and all that sort of stuff. So it's not like I wasn't paying attention. It's not like I wasn't invested, but that's the one where the expectations were highest and they fulfilled the expectations. But when your reality meets expectations, you go, all right. 96, I think, was cool, if for no other reason because of the adjustments. When you go back and look, that Danny Werfel was getting just absolutely blasted, and blasted late. If you listen to most anybody who's not a Florida State fan, when they were playing Florida State at Doak, and Florida State jumped out in front, and then they almost came back and won that game. But then also to then just lay it on them in the Sugar Bowl. The pass to Reed L. Anthony where he broke everybody's ankles when he caught the ball, and then reverse pivoted and went to the end zone. And it's your first, right? And that first one really sort of puts you on the map. But that's also why I think 06 is special, because there's a lot of programs. I mean, you look at Colorado, you look at Georgia Tech, BYU, programs like that have won one national championship in their history. I think Georgia's won too, right? I don't know, but you look at programs like that only have one championship. And you go, okay, like there are teams that ebb and flow in terms of being the blue bloods in college football. And Florida proved that they're a blue blood in 06 by winning their second championship with a different coach. There's also some underrated stuff from that 2006 team. So they beat Central Florida 42-0 in the second game of the year, and Central Florida decided to beg out after that and not play us anymore. So obviously 06 has a special place there. Took down Alabama, LSU, and Georgia with a loss to Auburn on the road. And Florida's never had an undefeated season, but I almost consider that game against Auburn a win, because they were up, I think it was they were up 17-11 when Leak had that ball where he threw the ball and they called it a fumble and it got returned for a touchdown the other direction. I think Florida wins that game if they don't have that that pop up. And then all of a sudden you're looking at, that stretch would have been Alabama, LSU, at Auburn, and Georgia with 4 straight wins. Yep. And then Florida State was still good back in 2006. They weren't great, but they were still good. Then an Arkansas team that was actually really good, the eighth ranked team in the country. And then you already mentioned Ohio State. So it's sort of, and I just sort of glossed over the South Carolina game, which was probably the most memorable game of that year. Again, I go back to the game against LSU is one that's just memorable because of the things that happened in there. The game against Auburn is memorable because of the stuff that happened, even though it was on the bad side. I barely remember the Georgia game that year, which is interesting. There was so much other stuff that was going on. The South Carolina game, I was supposed to be over at my grandmother's house for dinner, and I showed up like an hour and a half late, and my uncle's just like, "We get it, we understand."
Funny thing about that game is I was doing some freelance work for Comcast at the time when they would replay games for the South Carolina side. They needed a freelance camera guy there, so I was like, sure, I'll shoot it. I was 5 feet away from Steve Spurrier with a camera right in his face, waiting for his reaction to that final field goal that Jarvis Moss blocks. And all Steve Spurrier does is just give that all shucks smile that he does, and he just, you could tell he was disappointed, but it was just like oh dang it kind of smirk that the Steve Spurrier is kind of known for. And it was the moment I'll never forget. It was just, I could have talked to him. I could have high-fived him if I wanted to, but it felt weird just having the camera right in his face, just waiting for whatever reaction there was. So I had the camera. I widened the camera out a little bit so I wouldn't lose the shot. But I was like, what? I have to watch this. I have to peek at this field goal kick. So it was just, it was definitely a moment in time. Just that whole little timeout and field goal thing that I'll never forget. The whole 2 or 3 minutes, I'm just sitting there with a camera right in his face, waiting for his reaction.
Well, and the nice thing is it couldn't have ended any better for Florida fans, right? You win the game, but Spurrier comes in and proves what a fantastic coach he is, because he really was outgunned in that game, and comes into the swamp and really makes everybody sweat. It's a memorable game for everybody. It has its own name. It's got a place in Florida lore. At the same time, it leads to a national championship for Urban Meyer. So, obviously you root for Spurrier until he's playing against your team, and then Spurrier comes in and really shows out, and I think shows what a great coach he was. I'm not sure it could have ended up any better for Florida fans. I'm sure Spurrier would have liked to have seen the field goal go through, but couldn't have worked out any better for Florida fans. And again, I think that's sort of maybe why the 2006 season sticks out, is just the number of memories, the things that I remember from that particular season are fresher. I'm sure part of it is just fresher again, but I still think it's that second one makes a difference, right? The first one, there are a lot of programs out there that have won national championship. There aren't a lot of teams out there that have 2, and certainly then putting the icing on the cake with that 2008, there are very few programs that have 3. And so to have 3 national championships, 3 Heisman trophies, I think really does start to set Florida apart from different programs. Whereas before that, you could have said, well, the program really started in 1990 when Spurrier came. Well, now it's 3 decades of excellence. Mm-hmm. And, so that 2006 season was sort of the gateway to establishing that as the way Florida's program's viewed.
All right. Well, I'll let you start with the next one. Who do you hate more, Florida State or Georgia? People who've listened to this podcast, they kind of know my answer for a little bit, Will. But I'm interested to get your take on this. As you said, that you came to Florida in the 2000s from up north. So I'm interested to get your outlook on who do you despise more, the Seminoles or the Bulldogs?
It's funny. It oscillates, because I absolutely hate Georgia. I hate Georgia more right now. Because they're the main competitor, and Florida State has really struggled, especially with Taggart. But I would say for the most part, it's been Florida State, because if you think about the Spurrier years, Bowden really didn't have Spurrier's number, but that was a pretty even thing. You've got the choke at Doak. You've got all the different things where Florida wasn't able to come on top, and Florida State was really, Florida State was almost always first shot to play for the national championship for almost a decade. And you always had Florida State playing Miami. So you sort of had the state title going up between those 3. And that was really the big deal. And Bowden was it, right? The other thing is that Spurrier just beat Georgia like a drum. and it was continuous. And then Urban Meyer beat Georgia like a drum. So for most of my lifetime, Georgia hasn't been much of a threat to Florida, and Florida's had bragging rights a lot like we have bragging rights over Tennessee right now, right? So the rivalry with Tennessee has lulled because Tennessee has been sort of the little brother for 25 years now. But if Tennessee starts to get better, well, that rivalry is going to get a little bit spicier, and that sort of happened with me in Georgia recently. But now, as somebody who didn't grow up in the South, as somebody who didn't grow up in Georgia, Georgia obviously is a rivalry game. You want to win that game, but with as much success as Florida had, Florida State was always the one that I pointed to and said, this is the one that's most important. And from a recruiting perspective, that's still actually pretty true. But obviously want to get this one this year against Georgia, and levels of hate, Dave, levels of hate, not necessarily not hate one and can deal with the other. It's just levels.
Absolutely. We'll have to do this again. You brought up Tennessee. Next time we do a this or that, we'll have to do Tennessee or LSU. I think that'll be a good one there. I
mean, come on, man! It's been like 3 decades since Tennessee's been any good, so you might have to throw Kentucky in there. They're maybe a better rival than Tennessee at this point.
Maybe so. They've definitely played us closer the last 2 years. So yeah. This one, yeah, as I said, people follow me for any length of time. They know this is Georgia for me, and it's not even close. I grew up in Georgia. I had to, luckily, when I was going to grade school and high school and all that stuff, as you said, Will, we beat the crap out of Georgia. I had bragging rights all throughout school, going to school in Georgia, so they couldn't say much to me. But I got pranked. They would, and it was all 95% of it was all in good fun. They would take my Gator tag on my truck and turn it upside down. But one time I had some Georgia buddies of mine. We were out in the parking lot there at my high school, and they lifted my truck up off the ground just enough to where I couldn't really tell. So I get my truck, and I knew something was up. They're all sitting there, and I go to put it in reverse and go, and can't go anywhere because the back tire is up about 5 inches off the ground that I didn't really even notice. But fun things like that. But yeah, the game itself. I mean, look, Florida. We talked about Steve Spurrier coming in 1990. Florida put themselves on the map in the SEC, and Steve Spurrier knew it. I mean, he took that game personal. He couldn't beat Georgia as a player. He took it so personal, but he knew if Florida wanted to do anything in the SEC, if they wanted to do anything in the country, if they wanted to go to Atlanta, you have to beat Georgia. And that was his mindset. And that it made the difference in Florida football program, along with Steve Spurrier, and him knowing that is you got to go beat Georgia. So it's personal for me growing up in Georgia and all that stuff, but Florida's never been to Atlanta since the inception of the SEC championship game. Florida's never been to Atlanta and lost to Georgia in the same season. So it tells you how important that game is every year as well. So the importance of it, I think, speaks to that part as well. But yeah, just a pure hatred of that red and black and people barking like dogs, and the game being here in Jacksonville, of course, where I was born and raised most of my life, and then coming back to Jacksonville, the game holds a special part in my heart. But yeah, I despise Georgia much more. As far as Florida State, yeah, you can't forget the '90s there, and it was close. I won't. When Jimbo started his run there at FSU, it did. Because we were still beating Georgia for the most part at that time. So, yeah, that gap did close a bit, but I'm not sure anything can ever happen to where I'll despise any team more than I despise Georgia.
Well, let me ask you, have you had a good time telling your Georgia friends recently that they're like the Buffalo Bills of college football? Like,
absolutely.
You get there to those championship games against Alabama and lose against a backup quarterback. I mean, that's been the thing, is that if Georgia was winning national titles, then you're like, okay, there's not really any bragging rights here for Florida, and Georgia's coming through. But as long as they keep choking at the finish line, it's really just fodder for us, as opposed to
we can still hang on to our 1980 jokes.
Absolutely. And I mean, hang on to the 2017, 2018, 2019 jokes too, because they got smoked by LSU this past year. So yeah, I mean, look, don't get me wrong, I despise Georgia too, but the reality is that just, I mean, the image that I have in my head is just of Spurrier, of never worrying about Georgia.
Yeah.
That it was like, we're going to win. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens. We're going to pull that one out. And when it came to Florida State, it was a 50-50 proposition, maybe even a little bit less than that. And so it was a special thing when you beat Florida State back in the 90s, as opposed to the expectation of beating Georgia. And, like Eric Zier and those teams, they were sort of 8-5, 9-4, those sorts of things. They weren't 11-2 very often that I recall from back then. So maybe my memory is just faulty, but, Georgia was sort of a cute program, but not necessarily the program that Florida needed to beat to get to where they wanted to go. Whereas Florida State was definitely sort of the beast of the beast on the schedule that they needed to be able to take care of out of conference. And that's also where, once the SEC started to get stronger and stronger and stronger, Georgia was a part of that. Right. And Florida State sort of waned for a few years in there while Georgia got stronger. So look, if I grew up in Georgia, I would be right where you are, but but those Florida State rivalries, those were fun games. Those can't miss TV, and certainly a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, like I said, that's more personal for me than anything. So that's the reason I lean Georgia. Last one, Will. Here we go. Which one hurts the most? 2001 versus Tennessee, or 2012 versus Georgia? This one's a little bit tough as well here. I go back and forth on this one a bit, because 2001, we know, game against Tennessee's moved because 9/11 gets pushed to the end of the season. But, a lot of people forget Florida had already lost to Auburn that year too. Now, Florida was, one of the top teams in the country. When Tennessee comes into town, all Florida's got to do is beat Tennessee and then win the SEC championship game the next week. And Florida's playing Miami in the Rose Bowl for the national championship. So what's one reason that game hurt a lot. But I do go back and look, Will, at some point is, hey, look, that was as lauded as that 2001 team is, and it's Steve Spurrier's final season, that was still their second loss of the season. They lost to Auburn. To me, they should get penalized somewhat about that. And that doesn't really necessarily lessen the blow of losing that 2001 game, because, look, that 2001 Florida team, their best was, I do think their best was right up there with that 2001 Miami team. Maybe still probably a hair behind. That 2001 Miami team, so talented. I mean, and we saw it for years in the NFL with that team. I still, that 01 Florida team, their best, they were the only team that could give that 01 Miami team a run. And if Florida played their best on that day, they could definitely win a game versus Miami in 2001. So, but the reason people look at that Tennessee game is because they think it was such a lost shot at a national championship. And I'm still not sure they go beat that Miami team. And I still think they should get penalized somewhat for that game being their second loss. And there was really, that Tennessee team was okay. They weren't great, and they were made to look great that night, and they got lauded for that big win versus Florida that night. But man, they go and lose after that Florida win. All they had to go do was beat LSU in the SEC championship game that next week, and end up losing to Nick Saban and LSU. And Tennessee doesn't go to a national championship there. So a lot of people look at that Florida Tennessee game as a SEC East representative that should have went to a national championship, but it wasn't the case with Tennessee beating Florida and then losing the next week. So I penalize that 01 Florida team a bit, because that Tennessee loss was their second loss. And when we go to 2012, we've mentioned that season and how fun it was. Florida goes to A&M and Tennessee and gets two big victories, beats LSU at home as well, sets up a big showdown with Georgia. And Florida just fumbles all over themselves all day. I think 6 turnovers, for the day. Look, that offense wasn't that great anyway, but they had a chance in that game. But the offense wasn't great. You can't shoot yourself in the foot 5-6 times there and expect to beat that Georgia team that gave Alabama a run for their money in 2012 too. That was a really good Georgia team. Florida was pretty good in their own right. Still one of the best defenses, I think, in Gator history. In that 2012 team, as we mentioned, had a hair chance. And the reason it hurts because it was Florida's only loss. And Florida almost could have backdoored their way into a national championship game appearance. They weren't going to play in the SEC championship game after losing that Georgia game. But Notre Dame and USC are playing, and USC has a chance to win that game. And lo and behold, Notre Dame finds a way to win that game. But you could have had a chance. Well, what I was hoping for back in that 2012 scenario, I was like, oh, man, could you imagine a Florida-Georgia rematch for a national championship? And I think it was in New Orleans that year. If Florida could, if Notre Dame would have somehow lost to USC and then Georgia beats Alabama, you could have possibly had a 1-2 in the BCS Florida-Georgia rematch for the national championship, because Georgia would have been Florida's only loss, and Georgia was the SEC champ. Alabama would have had to get pegged behind a bit. So that would have been fun. That's kind of what I was hoping for at that point. But, I mean, that 2012 game goes down to the wire, even with the 6 turnovers. Jordan Reed fumble. He's running toward the end zone, about to score. Florida would have still needed a 2-point conversion anyway for that game to pull it out, but you thought you had a chance. He's running toward the end zone. Jarvis Jones catches him from behind, punches the ball out, and that's all she wrote for the Gators in that 2012 game versus Georgia. So all the summary there, I go 2012 Georgia just because I penalized that 0-1 team for having 2 losses.
It's funny. You hate Georgia so much. That colors everything that you say here.
I'm trying not to look at it that way, because I really do think, like, I was talking with that 0-1 team with somebody, and I was like, I think everybody forgets that that Tennessee loss was their second loss of the season. It wasn't their first loss. And granted, that first loss versus Auburn got glossed over. As I said, they were, I believe, ranked number 2 for that Tennessee game, so they had everything in front of them still. But man, it was just I penalize them a lot for that being their second loss.
Yeah, the only thing there is, so if Florida wins that game against Tennessee, they go to the SEC championship game against LSU, who they beat on the road 44-15 earlier in the year. So you sort of figure they're probably going to win that SEC championship game. And if they do, then they're the national title game with 1 loss. Certainly the Hurricanes were a good team, and maybe they don't take them down, which then gives us a different thing to complain about that 2001 season. But that I think the path to the championship is a little bit clearer from that 2001 team. The 2012 team, I don't think they beat Alabama in the SEC championship game if they beat Georgia.
Yeah.
And so you lose in the SEC championship game, and then you go play Louisville in the Sugar Bowl or whatever after that anyway, or wherever. I guess Georgia played the Capital One Bowl against Nebraska that year, so that's maybe where you end up. So the season basically ends up about the same if you lose that game to Alabama, and Alabama was really, really good in 2012. Mm-hmm. So the path to the championship, I think, was a little bit more murky when it came to 2012. Plus, because of the way things fell, we almost got another shot. So, you mentioned the Notre Dame USC game, watching that thing and sort of watching all the way through and watching all the dominoes fall and hoping that the dominoes will fall your way, made that season a lot more entertaining. The other thing is you look at the game against Tennessee. Tennessee actually turned the ball over 3 times in 2001. Florida only turned it over once. It's a home game. Mm-hmm. Rex Grossman threw for 362 yards, albeit on 51 attempts. They couldn't run the ball at all, 36 yards rushing compared to 242 for Tennessee.
And I could have looked it up. Well, it was 2 versus 5 or 2 versus 6, I think, for the ranking.
Yeah, I think they might have. I think Tennessee might have actually been 4, so they were
okay.
They were ranked. And Georgia,
but it was a top 5 matchup, and Florida was like a 14, 15-point favorite.
Yeah, well, and Tennessee jumped out real quick. I think 14-0, and then Florida was able to come back, and I mean, it was a back and forth battle. It was a really good game, right? I mean, it was one of those where going to the fourth quarter, you had a shot. The thing that I think we forget about the Georgia game in 2012 is that the final was 17-9. So as Jordan Reed was going to the end zone, or what looked like was going to the end zone there at the end, they still were going to need a 2-point conversion after he scored that touchdown. So it's not a sure thing. Maybe we're complaining about somebody dropping the ball in the end zone 2 plays later or a play later if he doesn't fumble that ball. And here's the reality. When you turn the ball over 6 times against any team, the fact that you only lost by 8 is a freaking miracle. so I look at it and say Florida probably deserved to win that 2001 game more than they deserved to win the 2012 game. I think their path to a championship was clearer in 2001 than it was in 2012. So and I was there. I was there on campus, living through 9/11, seeing that game move to the end of the year, and it was just a weird time. I mean, I remember we took a physics test the next week, and like right after 9/11, once we got back in school, I had a PChem test, and basically everybody failed. And he's like, well, I guess this is bothering people more than I thought. So, we'll just forget about that one. And that sort of stuff happened, right? People were affected by the events, very much not the same thing, but the way people have been affected by COVID and some of the racial unrest that's happened now. There's just sort of a feeling of unease, and that feeling existed in 2001. Sort of put life in perspective, which maybe made this loss a little bit less tough at the time. And that's maybe the thing that colors it a little bit too. But you asked me, it's 0-1 Tennessee, man. Like that's the one where I was there on campus. There would have been nothing better than celebrating a national championship on campus while you're a student. And I missed out on that in 0-1. So that's the one I'm going to go with.
I got you. And I'll be honest. Tomorrow, I could wake up tomorrow and it would be the other one. I do go back and forth on this one a lot, of which one hurts most. I guess it's just according to what kind of mood I'm in. So you caught me in the Georgia mood tonight. But yeah, that one, because I said for years, and even recently, that I've said that 0-1 game hurts the most. But as I said, just sitting here thinking, I got the feeling of the Georgia game. So I do go back and forth a lot with this one.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's nice to have that problem, right? That we're picking two seasons where Florida had a shot at getting to the national championship, and we're talking about the heartbreak associated with that, while also having 3 trophies in our case since '96. It's a good place to be. It's why everybody's so passionate about the team, and certainly gives us fodder to talk about.
All right, well, let me get a few tweets that a lot of people sent their thoughts into for this or that here. And Steve Schweiger says, Spurrier over Meyer. Spurrier started the dominance. Muschamp, not a jerk. So kind of going with what we were saying here. 06 for kind of the reasons we said here, Will. Under the radar here. He says, Georgia, I hate Butt Baloo to Lindsey Scott. So the date's all the way back to 1980 there. Steve Schweiger says 2012 Georgia outplayed them, but 6 turnovers was gut-wrenching. JJ at Chicken Tender Pub Sub, still one of the best names out there. I don't know why a Twitter name is after Chicken Tender Pub Subs, but it gets me every time.
Man knows some good subs when
he does. He does. He goes Spurrier over Meyer. Says Muschamp because he actually tried. 2006. I was in school, so it's special. FSU, I grew up in the 90s when Georgia was basically a gimme game. Go to your point there, Will. Mm-hmm. And he says 2001 Tennessee, would have loved to see Spurrier scheme against 0-1 Miami. Don't think 12 team would have beaten Bama in the SEC championship game. Gator Boy Tell him says he goes with Spurrier, and he says Muschamp. He also goes with 2006 for the year. Had to get this one in here. He says to hell with Georgia. And then last one here, 2012 Georgia, that Jordan Reed fumble will forever live in my memories. Sarah Higgins says she checks in here. She says Spurrier, he got the whole thing started. It is a Gator through and through. Muschamp, wouldn't vote for McElwain for anything. 2008, always felt like we win every game with them on the field. Georgia, now that FSU is in days gone by. She says 0-1 versus 12, both devastating, but living in Georgia made 12 worse. Terrence, not Terrence, not Terrence. There we go. That's his username on Twitter. So there, clearing it up there. He says Spurrier, since he built the program to where it is. Muschamp, only because he had high recruiting classes. So, I like that one. He says 2008 for the national championship year. FSU for FSU or Georgia. He says 0-1 Tennessee, rescheduled to the end of the season, kept us from contending for conference and national championship. Few more here. Justin Blair says Spurrier or Meyer. Muschamp, energy and groom young men. 2006, fun, unexpected ride. Georgia, out-of-state fan, he says. In 2012, Georgia lost affected program for years. That's kind of interesting thought there, Will, of, what happens if Muschamp does go on to, win that game, somehow beat Alabama in the SEC championship game, and maybe at least gets a national championship game appearance? Would it have bought him one more year?
I probably would have bought him another offensive coordinator switch. Maybe, I'm not sure. I mean, here's the reality. Like, Mullen is going to get an awful lot of rope because his team score points.
Yeah.
And, you can take a 42-38 loss and be like, all right, well, we were close. Like the LSU game last year. I mean, it's 2 touchdowns. LSU was clearly the better team. Florida hung with them for quite a while, and it's on the road. And, we didn't know what to expect from Trask and all that sort of stuff. But the fact that Florida's offense was effective in that game makes that game feel way different than if it was like 13-6.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, every game that Muschamp coached felt like it was either 13-6 or 6-13, and it was just
and it didn't matter. And it didn't matter the opponent.
It really did. I mean, Florida Atlantica 13-6, playing Texas A&M 13-6. I mean, it's funny too because you look back at that and you didn't really know who nobody knew who Johnny Manziel was when Florida played him, and all of a sudden that game looks a lot more. And
he was lighting up Florida early, and they made some great adjustments and just completely shut him down in the second half of that game.
Yeah, I mean, there were all on the way in both Muschamp and McElwain's tenures. There were games where you just felt like they put it together. I remember the game against LSU that was 14-6 in that 2012 year where they just ran right over LSU, and you were like, all right, these guys are physical enough to win the SEC. And then it turns out when you fumble the ball 6 times, not so much.
But then they destroyed a really good South Carolina team at home too. They had all kind of turnovers, but it was the week before the Georgia game, and they destroyed South Carolina.
Yeah, and then the next year
who had beat Georgia earlier that year.
Well, then the next year they couldn't get a punt off against South Carolina. So, I mean, look, I think coulda, woulda, shoulda. I suspect that the Muschamp's coaching abilities that we've seen since would have shown up against whoever they played if it wasn't Louisville. And I'm suspecting Alabama the next week. And we saw that losing to Alabama in the SEC championship game doesn't buy you extra years when it came to McElwain. So I doubt it would have bought Muschamp any more time either.
Well, Muschamp went to hunt the shark, so. And on the real part of that, he wouldn't have made fake death threats. There we go.
There you go.
Here we go. Last 3. 16 bogeys. Tremu, good buddy who partied with in Atlanta after the Peach Bowl. There he says Spurrier never will catch me going against the old ball coach. He says Coach Boom cared a lot and wanted to win. Players loved him. Fans did as well. He just wouldn't allow that offense to practice. He says easy 2008. It's kind of to your point, Will, here in a way. He goes, it cemented UF into a tier 1 blue blood. And he goes, if you will, he goes FSU all day. 2012, he goes, I cried, it hurt. Chris Garrard, he's picking Spurrier over Meyer. Says Muschamp, really wish it worked out for him. Great guy. 2008 national championship. Georgia, he says he would rather beat FSU, but beating Georgia generally means we're going to the SEC championship game. In 2012, Georgia for most heartbreak. And the last one here from Sam Stark goes, I'll take Meyer, would rather have Muschamp, want the 08 championship, think beating Georgia is more important, would rather relive the 2012 Georgia loss. I'm assuming that means he doesn't want to relive the 2001 Tennessee game there. So, a lot of fun. Will and I have more planned. Well, you had one more.
Well, yeah, you and I were going back and forth, and I wanted to know your opinion on Savage versus Planet Fitness, because that was the other remnant from McElwain's era, is those guys having to go off to the Gainesville Health and Fitness and exercise. That guy just left a really bad taste in everybody's mouth. It's amazing how many bridges he burned.
Personally, for me, I probably couldn't handle a Nick Savage workout, so give me Planet Fitness.
I can do it once. I just wouldn't be able to move for the next month and a half.
Let's take Casey on here and explain to us mat drills. I probably couldn't get through 10 minutes of one of those.
Yeah, it's all right. They just take me to the hospital when I passed out.
Yeah. But good one there. We got more planned. We have more behind the scenes. A couple more that I'll think of, and we'll do it again next time. Favorite helmet, favorite uniform combo, all that kind of stuff. Orange or blue. I think we should go into that too. Kind of stuff like that. So we got more fun ones. I think we can roll out sometime this summer.
Yeah, well, you don't want to break out a debate over the white helmets the first time you bring this gimmick out there, Dave. It's you're going to start a mutiny.
And the white helmet hive. We broke that curse. I don't want to hear it. I don't believe in curses. I don't believe in curses anyway. We don't win or lose because of a helmet. Get that out of your mind. That needs to be the moniker of the podcast from now on. Helmet color does not matter. The stars do.
But it affects recruiting, Dave. So
helmet color doesn't matter, but stars do. There we go.
We'll stick with the never dull moment there, buddy.
Yeah, all right, we will. Try to be funny there. Will try to be funny. All right, well, man, been busy at Read Reaction last couple weeks, or last few days, I should say, and really good piece there with Very from Twitter. So let our listeners know kind of personal with everything kind of going on in America right now.
Yeah, one of the nice things about having my own site is I can put stuff up that's not necessarily always football related. And, I think most people over the last week or two weren't really thinking about football so much as they were thinking about some of the racial divisions that are going on in the country. And, I'm married to a Chinese woman, and so I've got biracial kids. And so I reached out to Very on Twitter. He's at 157 Gale, and we just sort of went back and forth talking about, the Ahmaud Arbery case and the George Floyd case and the riots, and sort of trying to understand different cultures. So he's biracial, half white, half black, and so hey, what do I need to know? I need to reach out and have conversations with people. We've got this connection through Florida football. Let's have a discussion and see if it starts a discussion with other people as well. So we put that up there on Sunday, and then certainly you already mentioned the Reche Caldwell article that I put up as well. So that's what's up there on the site right now, and certainly go take a look. It's different, but I think it adds something to the conversation, hopefully makes you think. I know it made me think, and that was one of the things I think that was most rewarding about it is Very and I both went back and forth and said, that it made us think about what we were putting down on paper. And, if nothing else, built trust between he and I, and next time I'm in town, we're certainly planning on getting together and having a beer. So, just having the conversation makes a difference. I think hopefully that's what people take out of it and take out of this entire event is that, white people aren't evil, black people aren't evil. We got to learn to get together, learn to get along, and that involves having conversations.
Absolutely. So readreaction.com is where you can go and read Will's latest couple of articles there. Will, any much more stuff coming up? Of course, football players back on campus. I'm hoping we'll get to hear from Dan Mullen sometime soon with players back on campus and workouts head now. You probably not too much football stuff going on, trying to get the players back in shape and all that good stuff, but probably football on the horizon.
Absolutely. There's going to be some film study stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks.
That's right. Yep.
As the football season gets closer and closer, I know people want to start looking at where does Florida need to improve and what should we look for in terms of maybe the schematic things that Mullen's going to do that'll free some people up. And, he's not going to have the advantage of having those seniors at wide receiver. And we've talked about that a lot this offseason, but with the limited practice time, maybe what are the standard things we should be looking for that he trots out there and how will if a true freshman gets out there, how do you know if he's doing a good job or not? And those will sort of be the things hopefully I'm looking at over the next 2-3 weeks.
All right. It's Will Miles. Go follow his site, readandreaction.com, and follow him on Twitter at Will Miles SDC. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Everybody, if you like this or that, I'll post it back on Twitter and just keep sending all your weights. YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, put your comments there in YouTube. Give us your thoughts on this or that. Your favorite, Meyer or Spurrier, Muschamp, McElwain, 96, 06, 08, FSU or Georgia. 01, which one hurt the most? 01 Tennessee or 2012 Georgia? Just give you comments down there, and we'll keep interacting with you. So that'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown.